Welcome to Simplifying Remote Collaboration. In each episode, we'll discuss how the shift to hybrid working and learning has put growing pressure on IT departments to better support remote collaboration. At a time when resources are stretched thin by competing priorities, we'll explore ways to simplify the IT setup and management of hybrid spaces.
Everyone, and welcome back to Simplifying Remote Collaboration. I am your host for today, Ben Thomas. You know, when you look back at the pandemic and even in the post-pandemic world, some of the people who have been impacted the most by our changing workforce infrastructures and the constant shift in technology and demands has been our IT and technology teams. In some cases, even to the point where it's almost totally changed their job description. Now they're having to make decisions on pieces of gear, remote technology, and really helping decentralized workforces collaborate in a way that they never have before. And now that we have enough data to support that, especially over a 2 to 3 year term, it's time for us to analyze and dig in a little bit deeper into what that means for our community. And to help break it down for us today, I've got Raul Castanon from S&P Global. Raul, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Raul, one of the things that you've seen at S&P is obviously that data helps support some of those metrics. So set the table for us a little bit. What are some of the data points that you're seeing for the IT and integrated technology world?
Yeah, definitely a good starting point. So what we have seen is basically an evolution in three distinct phases, where we have first the office-centric work environment with occasional mobile and remote workers. Then from one day to the other, we were all forced to work remotely. That's a very distinct second phase, and obviously with many challenges for IT. What we're seeing now, and I could say based mainly on the survey that we did back in October, most companies are now transitioning to a third distinct phase where it's all about hybrid work. Now it's become certainly the buzzword of the year for sure. But it's definitely a trend that is impacting IT, and it's impacting how we conduct ourselves in our day-to-day work. So the first thing that I could highlight, Ben, is that it's a separate, distinct phase, and it has different challenges to the ones that IT experienced at the beginning of the pandemic, where the focus was more on business continuity. What I can say is that now it's all about flexibility.
And, you know, we talk about the changing role and the challenges a little bit of the IT and technology teams at these enterprise places. You know, break it down a little bit more for us. What are some of the core challenges that you're seeing these people face on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so security and compliance certainly are key to this transition into a new phase. So when you go from the office-centric environment where IT basically had near full control of the environment to a remote work, that really changes the landscape for IT in terms of security. Now, since the focus at the start of the pandemic was more on business continuity, we know that many organizations actually bypassed, or they were forced to be more flexible in terms of security and compliance. Now that we are nearly 3 years after the start of the pandemic, what we see is organizations paying more attention to security and compliance. And it's not just the need to support the distributed environment, since we know that many people will choose to remain working remotely, but you also have external factors like last year, I think it was around September, where the SEC came down on financial firms and banks regarding compliance and security for business communications. So IT is now facing increased pressure to enforce security and compliance. So I think that's going to be a big topic this year.
The actual purchasing decisions, the way that people are making decisions on gear, whether it be webcams, whether it be things like laptops, or even collaboration technologies, has evolved, and that buying cycle looks a little bit different. Talk about how the data supports some of those changes in the buying cycle.
Well, you bring up two topics that I think are central to what we're seeing right now in terms of challenges for IT, and they are in addition to security and compliance. You have scalability and flexibility. So what IT now needs to do, like I said, going from the office centric to the extreme distributed workforce, it's now a combination that requires flexibility, and that flexibility just increases significantly the level of complexity that IT has to deal with. So as you mentioned, we now have to deal with the uncertainty of how many people will be participating in a meeting. Will they be present in the office or remote? Can we provide the same level of experience to both those that are in the office and those that are participating remotely? And so that brings up numerous challenges. And then, in addition to that, rather than a centralized workforce in an office, you have this multitude endpoints to take care of. So, as you mentioned, how do you do that at a scale? So that's definitely bringing up numerous challenges. I could mention, for example, the need for automation and the ability to for IT to do many tasks remotely as well.
When you talk about some of these implementation challenges, things like having to support new devices and support new users and support onboarding, talk about some of those key challenges that this new technology and some of these new responsibilities are creating from an actual device management and IT standpoint.
Great question. So, again, just going back to the context of from the office centric to the remote work and now to a mixed environment. So there was significant investment in communications and collaboration at the beginning of the pandemic, namely, like we said, because of the need for business continuity. That was the urgency. We did see at the start of the pandemic, so this could be back to Q2 and Q3 in 2020, that there was a significant contraction in terms of IT spending. So out of the 10 categories that we follow up on, the only one that did not experience a contraction was business communications and collaboration. And that trend has continued through the lockdown period and until now. So we still see companies investing there. Now, what happened last year, there was a shift because companies were coming out of the pandemic. They were investing, for example, in remote work technologies. So you see a lot of companies investing, obviously, in mobile phones and laptops, tablets, all sorts of devices, business communications and collaboration software, cameras, and other peripherals. However, towards Q3 and Q4, with all the macroeconomic factors, including the war in Ukraine and inflation concerns, interest rates, and obviously a lot of companies have since then gone into layoff mode. So we do see once again a contraction in spending. What's interesting this time is that there are still requirements that need to be addressed that IT has to deal with. So what we are seeing is a more careful assessment of how they will be spending their money. So in other words, they want to do more with less. I think that that's a strong testament to the trend that we see with unified communications. So rather than having different separate tools, and in many cases, they may be actually duplicating the technologies that you have. Companies are looking to optimize, streamline the tools they have. So there is a contraction in spending, but I think what companies are doing is just being very careful how they spend their money.
When you look at these offsite teams, whether they be hybrid, whether they be decentralized teams altogether, one of the biggest challenges has been to create a scalable environment, right? And you see, specifically with a lot of the hybrid workforces, that some people are in office sometimes and not others, and there's kind of this weird push and pull of numbers of people that are in offices. But now we have to create technology and environments, whether that be in conference rooms and control rooms, or leveraging meeting technology, but make them adaptable to whatever needs they might have that day. Talk about some of the ways that you're seeing the IT teams deal with some of that scalability.
Yes, there's a lot of interesting changes here. So one interesting trend that we saw last year was that even as the lockdown conditions were phased out, we didn't see many employees going back to their daily commute. So, looking at different statistics, the number seems to have plateaued at about 50% in terms of how many employees are actually going back to the office, with the remaining either having staying at home, or having a hybrid work schedule. Um, what does that mean for the office? Well, we also saw that a significant number of organizations are downsizing their corporate offices. So obviously there is a lot of unoccupied office space. However, while at first, there were concerns in terms of what this means for AV specialists, we did see last year significant investment in renovating the office space. So you see many companies getting rid of cubicles and individual offices, and instead they're investing in more of a collaborative environment. So meeting rooms, for example, and they are being updated with the latest technology, and technology that supports this hybrid work. So, in other words, providing an equally engaging experience for those that are in the office, as well as for those that are working remotely. So there's many opportunities for AV specialists still. It does come with some nuances, though. So it does require more attention to these advanced technologies. There is definitely a need for a higher quality of sound and the video, both for the in-person participants, but also for the remote participants. And the last thing that I could say is that with so many people working in different places, it places more demand on IT, not just in terms of providing a good level of experience for those remote users, but then also the ongoing support that this requires. So it's a challenge for IT and for AV specialists, for sure.
I appreciate that answer, Raul. It's helpful to hear that context. And one of the things that I wanted to ask too, specifically revolves around what I'll call the typical channel, right? Historically, the IT and technology decision making process looks a little bit different. And today you're seeing a lot more of these decision makers work with designers, work with integrators, work even in some cases directly with hardware companies, right? How would you say the specking and even that buying process has evolved a little bit in the last couple of years?
Yes. So the shift to this new work environment, I could say, more than anything, accelerated trends that your listeners may have already seen coming before the pandemic. but they really accelerated. So it really requires AV specialists to stay up to date. For example, in terms of capabilities for automation, reducing the need to do on-site support, so centralizing support as much as possible. So that translates into cloud-based capabilities, for example, for monitoring AV equipment. Just thinking about the need for IT to scale their capacity to support different sites at the same time, and probably with a smaller number of people. The other, I think, interesting dimension to this is there are many employees that have come on board that are remote, and they don't know what it's like to go into the office every day. So what does this mean for IT? That means you have to provide an onboarding day one capacity to make these employees productive from the very start. And then the ongoing provisioning and support, the full cycle that AV technology requires. All of that has to be scalable. It has to be, as you said, easily deployed and in a very fast way. You cannot afford to have someone sitting at their home for 1 or 2 weeks waiting for their laptop to come in and then set it up and so on.
Raul, we appreciate your insight, and we appreciate all of the information that you've given our listeners today. Raul Castanon over at S&P Global, thanks so much for joining us on Simplifying Remote Collaboration. And thank you all for listening. We hope to have you tune in again soon.